So, talking a bit more about turns. Um, so, when I'm working on scales, just generally, there are a handful of things I like to just kind of have together so that I sort of feel like I know the scale well. And those things would be intervals, um, diatonic triads, diatonic seventh chords in various configurations. A couple other things, I guess, too. Um, but uh, but anyway, I'm gonna start sort of thinking about how to apply turns to those things. And we're starting with the intervals. A lot of the process that we're going to use for the intervals we'll also use for the other things too. But I'm going to go over them individually because as you add a note, three notes in a triad instead of two notes in the interval, um, then we tend to we're gonna have to adjust the rhythm of things to make the turn kind of work the way we want it to. So to speak about intervals a little bit, we're talking about skipping through a scale. So starting on C, and instead of playing E, instead of playing D, we play E. Starting on D, we skip E and we play F. Starting on E, we skip up to G. And from there, we can also do, for example, like a descending third. So instead of starting on C and skipping up to E, we start on E and skip down to C. Another one that I find to be really, really, really useful is the alternating interval. So we skip up and skip down. So we sort of think of the low note of the interval, not the first note we play, but the low note of the interval is kind of moving through the scale. So, and we alternate between skipping up from that low note and skipping down to that low note. So it will sound like this. And we can do all these same things with fourths, with fifths, sixths, and sevenths. Bigger intervals, I guess, if you wanted to. But anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to apply the turns to some of this interval stuff to kind of see what's happening. We'll work today with a third, but know that it would also work with any of the other intervals too, and another word on that a little bit later on. Starting with the third, we sort of think about how to do this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the basic turn. So if I have F, if I have C, and then I turn up to D and back to C, and then skip up to E, and that's my interval. Becomes So we're going to work through these in the same way that we did the regular turns and the scale stuff in the last little video here. And by that I mean we're going to start by working across string sets, parallel fingerings, meaning that like same number of notes on each string, which can generally keep our picking the same. We keep the fingerings; they'll need to change a little bit, but very similar. And then from there, we'll move on to sort of forcing ourselves to work vertically across the different strings. This is a pretty common thing that a lot of people sort of encourage with this kind of practice, technical practice. Randy Vincent breaks things up this way in a lot of like his books and that sort of thing. So it's a pretty nice way of doing it. You sort of get used to one fingering, and then you can start using things quickly once you do that. And then from there, you get used to mixing the fingerings as you go on. So anyway, that's what we're going to be doing with this. So we're going to start with C, up a little higher here. We're going to do our turn, and then jump up to E. So when I say jump up, I mean that the thirds are sort of spread across strings on two strings, low notes on one string, high notes on the other. So and then this one's a little tricky on the next set of strings. And the next set, I'll leave it start on C. And then then we could do the next string set as well. We can also do these once you're sort of comfortable with this. We can do these descending as well, and try and keep kind of the same pattern where the high note of the third is on the higher string and the low note of the third is on a different string, is on a lower string. So. Keep going down the string sets like that. We can do the alternating ones, which take a bit more thought. They're really fun. So I guess a little more. So they're super cool. And these things are kind of turn up in music a lot. There's a beautiful solo by the trumpeter Clifford Brown, September Song, Sarah Vaughan's September Song, where pretty early in the solo he plays this line. So it's a descending third. It's an A flat, starts in the A flat, G, F, and then from E, turn, descends a third. D flat, turn, descends a third, lands on C. So it's something that turns up. That turns up. In a lot of real music, so it's a very handy thing. Can start getting these turns sounding a little bit more interesting. So some other things that we would want to do. I sort of ran through a couple different things there, but we'll also want to do with the thirds. Not as applicable with the other intervals, but with the thirds, we will also want to try playing the notes of the third on the same string. So you sort of say, like, start on C here, and the E will be on the same string rather than two different strings. So we turn and jump, turn, like that. And then something to think about as we move on to other intervals would be just what kind of process you might want to employ for getting into those. So once I have a student who's gone through and kind of learned the scales and kind of gotten comfortable making melodies with the scales, and they're learning licks and things like that, and I think, like, okay, well, this might be a good time for us to start getting into some of this more intense scale stuff. I don't just sort of throw these at them systematically. I reorder them a bit in a way that I think makes sense, and that order is we start with thirds first. First of all, they're kind of the easiest of the bunch. They are not easy by any stretch, but they're easier than the other intervals are. They also turn up a lot in music. Like, for example, if you have like some little cliches like that we see in all kinds of music. They're right there. We also see them obviously as triads, parts of triads. Parts of it, enclosures often look like a third. You start on D, go down to B, come up to C, and it sort of looks like thirds. Which might not be really like scales and thirds, but like having those under your fingers can be really handy for a lot of very common jazz vocabulary. And then after that, I would say it's sixths usually is the one that I go to. For the same reason, really common. Skipping across, from the fifth up to the third of a triad is going to be a sixth. Songs like Mysterioso employ a lot of sixths. It's a really common melodic leap because it outlines notes from chords, things like that. So it's really common, but it tends to be harder than the thirds because it's a wider interval, so we're most of the time skipping strings. Not always, but a lot of the time skipping strings. From there, I double back and do fourths. They're pretty tricky because it's a lot of same fret, different string, which involves either a small finger bar or like a lot of planning of your fingers for how you're getting there. But also really common, the fourth up or the fifth up to the tonic. So it's right there in Green Dolphin Street. There it is. Bimsha swing. So it's everywhere. It's a melodic thing that's very common. It also happens to be inside of your inverted triads between the fifth and the root. And then from there, the fifths and the sevenths. They're a little more idiosyncratic. You still see them in things, for sure. The seventh is a leap that is included in the seventh chords. It's not unheard of at all. The fifths are actually pretty common with trumpet players in particular, but brass players because of the harmonic series. So you see that jump fairly regularly. It's not super uncommon. And then obviously like jumping from root to fifth in a triad also. So they're not uncommon, but I tend to do them in that order: third, then sixth, then fourth, then fifth, then seventh. That seems to make a lot of sense in terms of just like what to tackle. And with each of these, you spend as much time as you need to, and play them in every solo you do all the time for a day or two, and kind of get used to the way they feel, the way they sound. Then move on to doing like the descending version and the alternating version. And once you feel like you've really just like you kind of want to move on, just move on to the next one. But don't do it before. There's no reason to rush through this stuff. It's very, very tricky and sounds very, very cool. So anyway, that's kind of the next installment. That's kind of the next step in kind of applying these turns, is applying them to those intervals, which is really fun and kind of a big task that can take a lot of time. So cool. Have fun.